Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Queer Money Follow-Ups, or maybe this is your first one, so welcome to Queer Money Follow-Ups. Queer Money Follow-Ups are when we follow up on the old episodes of the Queer Money podcast. We have over 200,
Vintage.
almost 250 episodes
Call them
of
vintage.
next week is 250. So we're going back and revisiting some topics that we've discussed, and we're talking about them here together on YouTube. And we broadcast live on Facebook and Twitter, several platforms, to kind of rehash some of these topics because a lot of you didn't know about the Queer Money podcast when we first discussed them. Also, there's lots of updates to things like this. Although the one that we're talking about today there isn't a whole lot of update to it. The question I have for you is, would you like to be a gay daddy? I think that there's two terms, right? Two terms for gay daddy. One is one that is actually involves real children and not financial and emotional children, so to speak. I speak from a
We
place.
all have that friend.
Right. Well, I speak from a place of experience. I dated a much older, well, not much older, but an older gentleman for a while,
Until you found true love.
Well, no. We broke up before you and I got together, so it wasn't you didn't steal me away from him. But this topic, or what we're going to talk about today, is actually centered around having children, gays having children. It's a topic that we covered on the podcast quite a bit, but this one was a little bit more of a personal story relating to two of our friends. And so we all know someone who is that oopsy child, right? The child that is 8 to 10 years younger than their next oldest sibling, or the child that is a surprise to two people who weren't intending on having children, or maybe didn't think they could have children, or the result of a one-night stand that was right, exactly. And we know that this doesn't happen to gay men, right? At least not anyway. It's funny because John always
There
says,
are no oopsies, and even when we try to have children,
right.
I eventually have to break the bad news to David
Right.
that the babies didn't survive.
Right. I always say, but babies don't live. So, but we know that there is this strong desire, and it seems like there's even more and more of this strong growing desire of gay men having kids. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. Right?
Yeah, I think probably my guess is the sharp increase is probably due to marriage equality in 2015. Suddenly, we had our relationships recognized and have all the legal protections that come with marriage, and then the community started to ask itself, well, what is the next step? What else? What else do we want our lives to look like? And now a lot of gay men, same-sex couples, are thinking, well, I too would like to have children. And since we have some more stability and some more security because of marriage equality, then maybe children is in the cards for us.
Yeah. And so we wanted to talk about some advantages, the advantages that gay men have when it comes to becoming gay daddies. I think we oftentimes think that we're at disadvantages a lot, but if we focus on the positive things, then maybe we can bring about the things that we want. And you bring up that point about about marriage equality and the legal structures that are starting to be there for queer people, especially, but when we're right now we're talking about gay men having kids. Those legal structures are starting to get there, although we're just constantly seeing this pushback in certain states where they're trying to prevent this from happening, which I don't understand why. There are now lots of empirical data. There's lots of studies. There's lots of information out there. There's lots of firsthand examples of people saying that having two fathers or two mothers is just as beneficial to the child as opposite sex parents, and there's actually a growing amount of proof out there that is showing that these children actually are saying that they're actually in some cases more well-adjusted because they have parents who have this strong desire to bring them into the world or to parent them. So I think there's a growing number of people who are seeing it being done and want it. There's a growing number of people who see the pathways to it getting easier, and so they are starting to go after it. And I think that there's also the mental block of you can't do that. That a lot of gays are starting, or queer people are starting to say, that it doesn't matter anymore, right? They're getting over this, well, you're gay, you're not allowed to do that. And so they're just saying, well, I've always wanted to have kids.
So I'm going to do what I want.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so we definitely want to focus on the positive. And very often, I think when we talk about the idea of same-sex couples having children, it does seem to be because of the media and certain factions of the of America that it's an acrimonious discussion for us. But we want to focus on the positives because there are some positives, as the two guests that we had on this particular episode exemplified.
Yeah. So the story that we shared on the episode 46 of the Queer Money podcast was of our friends Jonathan and Christopher, who had a strong desire to start a family even before they were committed to each other. It was something that they had been talking about, that both of them, before they found the one, they really wanted to have families. And although I think Chris was an only child, and Jonathan came from a family where I think he's one of 4 kids, and they both felt like that there wasn't anything that could hold them back from being fathers.
Yeah, they share their story of how they actually met online in Florida, and how when they first met, one of the things that did appeal each to the other was that they both had this desire to have children, and so they knew from the very beginning, even before the relationship started, that they wanted to have children. And then when they decided to say, hey, let's just keep this as a you and me kind of thing. From the very beginning, they started thinking about, and then slowly that evolved into planning for what it would take to have children.
Yeah, and for them, we talked about when we interviewed them, which was in 2017, they still did not have kids,
Yeah.
and
they were like 6. Were they 6 months or 12 months into it?
12 months into it.
Yeah.
Right. And they actually went over, I think it was over 2 years before they now have 2 beautiful little girls. They love to post pictures of their girls. I think all parents, right? That's one of the rites of passage as a parent, is posting pictures of your children. But they're now seeing their strong desires, their ikigai. We talked about that back on episode of 42 or 41 about having a purpose in life, and this was kind of part of their purpose in life. It was to be fathers, and now it's great to see that they're in that situation.
And they did share on that episode that a traditional adoption process can take anywhere from 6 months to typically to up to 2 years, but there have been some parents waiting up until as long as 7 years. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit, but their 2-year wait actually was quite normal, even though that might, to those of us who haven't gone through the process, might think that sounds like a completely arduous process. But we'll talk about the benefit of that here in a second.
Right. So, for them, having a family or being a part of a family is one of the things that they knew would bring them happiness in life. And they wanted to really have this sense of fulfillment. And we believe that there are 5 building blocks that help people really have true happiness in life. And one of those building blocks is love. And love can be between you and your partner or as a family. It's amazing when you talk to individuals. If you're a parent, you know this, but it's amazing the bond that parents have with their children and the ability to express love. I remember going to get maybe a little emotional here. My ex and I were together for 5 years, and I asked him out the day that he and a lesbian friend of his found out that they were pregnant. So he was in the family planning process already, and I remember the day that our son Joey called me Daddy David for the very first time. I was driving down the street, and literally I practically drove off the road because it just so much emotion, and I started crying and all that. There's a very strong bond that parents can have with their children, which I think is part of the reason why there's this strong desire, right? So we talked, or we said that we were going to share three things or three advantages to LGBTQ adoption, and I think that the first one is really a very interesting one, and that is this strong desire,
Yeah.
right? As we pointed out, there isn't that kind of oopsy with queer folks, especially. I guess it can happen to bisexual individuals, but very few individuals in the LGBT community are going to accidentally have children.
Yeah, you never walk up to a gay man at a bar getting drunk because he accidentally had a child.
Right. Yeah.
Accidentally got somebody pregnant.
Right. And so I think that if you are on the path to adoption or starting a family as a gay man, there is intent there.
Right.
And intent is something that that is apparent in most adoption situations, right? Although there are some adoption situations where children are adopted out of family obligation, which was something we talked about on the episode with Jonathan and Chris, how sometimes some birth mothers will get along in the process, and then along comes a family member who either doesn't want the child to be outside of the family or has expressed that they don't want the child to be adopted by gay men or by queer people. But this strong desire is something that you as an individual, if you want to have children, can play up during the adoption process. You know, it's not like going out and getting a handbag or adopting a dog. This is for life. And actually that was one of the things that Jonathan mentioned in the episode when we were recording this. He said this is going to change our whole lives. And I think that's one of the important things that that really is apparent when you look at individuals who are, especially individuals who are before they've adopted children, how they know that this is going to be a significant change to their lives.
Yeah, and definitely Jonathan and Christopher's life has completely changed, especially now that they've had two children. So they were trying to have initially one child, and I think long term they wanted to have more children, but the two came rapidly.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It completely changed their lives. But I think, to that point, the strong desire is, Jonathan and Christopher shared about the adoption process, the whole working with a social worker and then working with the adoption agency, and how you do have to have your home inspected, and they do a very in-depth, some would maybe even say invasive interview of you as individuals. And you
I think he called it the sex, drugs, and rock and roll portion of the.
Where they ask you everything that you've ever done in your life, and so it's somewhat invasive. But to the point number one, that strong desire in that process, you can exemplify and demonstrate that this is a burning strong desire for you, and the better you play that up, the better you use that, the more likely that you'll be able to find an agency and a social worker who will want to work with you and make that process hopefully as amicable as possible.
Right. So that's your first advantage. Your second advantage is your ability to plan and get ready, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
because of the fact that we don't have the oopsies, because these processes take some time, even if you're going through IVF and you're going to be a biological parent, there's still a long process in place there, right? So use that to your advantage. And one of the interesting things is, if you use that to your advantage, it does allow you to move yourself up in that ability to prove to adoption agencies, to birth mothers, to individuals in the adoption ecosphere that you are a suitable parent. What was interesting, Jonathan and Chris said that when they made this decision and they knew they were going to get started in this process, the two of them moved into a studio apartment so that they could save money. They realized that there were going to be sacrifices, or not necessarily sacrifices. I think they knew that there were going to be changes to their life in the future, that they were going to prepare for those changes by making some of those changes early on so that they would be even more prepared for the actual process.
Yeah, they both got second jobs. They set up dedicated separate accounts to cover various needs in the adoption process, and for after they would welcome initially their first child home.
Right.
And we interviewed Adrienne Elliott on one of our Queer Money podcast episodes from Adoption Options, and she talked about how one of the steps that precludes folks from actually adopting, maybe in the timeline that they would like to adopt children, is that their finances aren't ready. So part of that invasive investigative research that they do to make sure a person or a couple is prepared to adopt is that they look at your finances.
Right.
And she said that the number one reason why they postpone adoption for some of their clients is because their finances simply aren't ready. And Jonathan and Christopher talked about how they made that a very primary goal of theirs in the whole process was to be fiscally ready to have children, not only to pay for the adoption process, because that can be anywhere from quite cheap to quite expensive depending upon where and how the adoption takes place, but then also to be able to take care of their children after they welcome them home.
Right. And a word of caution here, for those of you who are out searching for information about the adoption process, we've done some digging ourselves. And on one of the major websites that focuses on gays with children, there is a video that talks about 3 ways to be able to pay for the process of having children. And we are actually quite shocked and disappointed, and honestly we're a little angry at the advice that they're giving, because the advice is that the 3 things that they suggest individuals do is to either borrow money or ask your parents for money, to borrow $65,000 to $150,000, or to refinance your home. All 3 of those things set you up for possibly getting denied during the adoption process. And why is that? Well, if you're getting a huge infusion of cash from someone else, you haven't actually proven that you have the financial ability to be able to pay for the things that you're going to need. We've seen that the cost of raising a child to the age of 18, not including college, averages about $245,000 right now. So if you're not prepared financially to pay for that kind of additional costs in your budget, you shouldn't be having children. And if you're just going to borrow or get money from mom and dad to pay for the kids, are you going to be able to pay for them long term?
Exactly. It was disappointing because in no part of that video did they share any sort of response. I don't know how I want to phrase it, where you take the responsibility to prepare to have children. It was always like we got to get a loan, seek the help or an altruism from someone else.
Right.
And I don't know, is it really up to your mom and dad to give you $65,000 from their retirement or whatever it is that they're going to need eventually, so that you can have children? I mean, granted, those are resources that you can use. But there was no sort of personal responsibility in that video of how can you save and invest to have children? What are ways that you can earn extra money? Kind of the exact opposite of everything that Jonathan and Christopher did themselves,
right?
To kind of take responsibility to reach a goal that they wanted to reach.
Right. And the other thing I find so angry about borrowing $65,000 to $100,000, $150,000, these organizations that lend that kind of money expect you to pay that back in anywhere from 3 to 6 years, right? So you're looking at having payments of $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month in order
Yeah.
to bring the child home.
That doesn't actually help you.
And right, so are you able to afford that? Now, granted, there are some couples that is something they can afford, and that is fine. But I think what it does is it shows, opens a door for a lot of folks to get hope that this is a process they could use,
It just
and then it also could then eventually cause them to be denied because they haven't built the financial
the equity.
right. They haven't built a financial process in place to show that they can pay for the daily life of having a child.
Right.
It is kind of similar. I hate to say this, it's similar to folks who emotionally want to go out and adopt a dog. Right. Or I don't even, I think even like designer dogs. There's all sorts of dog rescues. And it's amazing how many of these dog rescues, John and I are looking at possibly adopting Frenchies through a Frenchie rescue. It's amazing how many people are giving up these animals because, one, they didn't understand the costs associated. They didn't understand the responsibility. And I am fearful that what some of these websites are encouraging is the same kind of behavior that we see with individuals who are now giving up these dogs because they don't want the responsibility or they can no longer afford them.
Exactly. And tip number 3.
Right. Well, I do want to back up on that one. There are a lot of resources out there. Do your homework. We interviewed Becky Fawcett of Help Us Adopt on one episode of Queer Money, and she is a part of the grant process. There's grants out there that specifically focus on same-sex couples or LGBTQ adoption. She doesn't necessarily focus on that, but she focuses on adoption for individuals who typically cannot adopt or financially cannot adopt. So she's trying to help individuals get to that point. So if you're in this process, look for all of the opportunities. And that is kind of the third point here is opportunity will present itself, but one of the biggest opportunities that you have and advantages you have is you have the opportunity to exercise patience. As we mentioned, Jonathan and Christopher waited for over 2 years. And in a conversation that I had with them at, I want to say it was I think it was Sierra's first birthday. I think it was her first birthday party. I had a conversation with them, kind of going back to some of the topics that we had talked about during the podcast. And one of the things they mentioned was they actually were kind of glad that it took that long because they were able to prepare even more. But the nice thing is that exercising patience, oh my God, if you don't have children and you want to have children, especially for children who are newbies, 3, 4, 5 years old, you are going to have to learn patience. It's something you will need to teach your children, but you might as well learn it yourself, and you better learn it before because you will have to exercise patience.
Absolutely. So definitely do your homework, use the time to your advantage, exercise that patience, maybe do some meditating. And then like David said, find those grants. There are resources out there to help you that aren't necessarily loans that have interest rates and that have term limits.
Right.
You definitely want to look for all the options that are out there. And there are more and more companies that are providing some sort of adoption assistance or family growing assistance for their employees. So look to your employer, look to grants online, check out Becky Foster's website, helpusadopt.org, and other resources that are similar to that.
Yeah. And again, don't rush into this. Right? Don't be emotionally swayed by some of these websites that are encouraging you to do this rather quickly.
Be smart about it.
Be smart about it, right? We're here to help you with personal finance. That is our goal. We want the queer community to be financially sound and stable. And the last thing that we want to see is queer families breaking apart because of the financial problems that they have because of making emotionally charged decisions. We've made emotionally charged decisions that hurt us financially, and we want to help prevent you from doing the same.
And you don't want to do that with a child or children.
Exactly.
It makes it harder.
Right.
So let us know in the comments below whether or not you would like to be a daddy someday. We would love to hear whether or not that percentage of LGBTQ or same-sex couples having children increases at all. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Queer Money Follow-Up. Here's your Queer Money Follow-Up takeaway from this episode. As you saw earlier, we are giving away our 5 building blocks of a happy gay life. One of those building blocks, as David had mentioned, includes love. So definitely you want to check that out. So go ahead and download that at debtfreeguys.com/happy. And then join us tomorrow for episode number 47 of the Queer Money Follow-Up series, where we cover Queer Money podcast episode number 47. And this is an exciting topic. I'm looking forward to talking about it. Purpose-driven spending, something that more of us need to do these days. And it'll actually not only help us with our wallet, but also get more satisfaction out of our spending.
Exactly.
And then finally, as always, please like this video, give a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and set notifications on this channel so you can join us for future discussions. We would love to have this be more of a dialogue than a presentation. So thank you, and we will see you tomorrow.